Thank you guys all for being here today. For those of you who are new here, the Women in Trucking Association is a nonprofit organization with the mission to encourage the employment of women in the trucking industry, promote their accomplishments, and minimize obstacles faced by women working in the industry. For more than a decade, we've focused on this clear mission and have been supported by a passionate leadership team, highly engaged members, and committed sponsors and partners. We continue to build a strong community among our members, primarily business professionals and professional drivers who believe in and support our mission. I'd like to introduce you to Rachel Pradden, Senior Marketing Campaign Manager at LoadSmart, who will be getting us kicked off today. Rachel?
Thank you so much, Courtney. It's great to have everyone here, and thank you for having us. And I want to welcome you to our panel discussion on how small carriers can stay competitive in any market. And with us today for this panel discussion is Damian Hutchins. He's our co-founder and CEO of trucking company Rollzy. John Seidel, a nationally known DOT and FMCSA expert and CEO of Trucking Wins, and Lainey Coleman, one of our solutions experts here at LoadSmart. And we have a list of questions that will cover the main topics of relationship building with shippers, as well as your drivers, driver recruitment and retention, cash flow, and the tech stack that can help you with visibility and decision making. And we're here to have you ask our questions as well. So please feel free to use the Q&A option there to ask questions of our panelists. Get started today. And I'm going to go ahead and post the links of our panelists so you can see their websites, like for Damian, John, and Lainey there. And before we get started in actually asking all the questions, if you wouldn't mind, panelists, sharing a little bit about yourself. Before we get started, Damian, could you share a little bit about your background and what got you started in the...
Yeah, of course. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for attending and joining us. So I spent most of my career, about the last 17 years, in various tech companies, usually on an operational side. My focus has always been taking a very manual team and working on automating it. Sometimes it's customer-facing teams. In my last role, I was actually at a company called Convoy, which is a broker. And my job there was actually running the matching function and looking at what are all the manual tasks we do and how do we automate those. I always knew I wanted to be in trucking, and I was just kind of waiting for technology to catch up so that I could join the industry. So I've been in the industry now for about 5 years or so now, not too long. And I sort of learned sort of the marketplace side at when I was at Convoy and figured out kind of where maybe there was a gap in the market. So started Rollzy just about 2 years ago and been running trucks. We have 22 trucks running up and down Interstate 5 on the West Coast now, and been having a blast doing it.
Great. Thank you so much. And John, could you share a little bit of your experience and your passion around compliance?
Yeah, so hello, everybody. I used to be a state patrol inspector. So I worked the weigh stations, pulling trucks over at the scales or on the road. Did that for about 12 years, and I became an investigator with the Fed. So if you've ever heard of a conditional rating or an unsat or fines and penalties, I apologize ahead of time, but that could have been me if you were in Wisconsin or Illinois. Then I became a hazmat agent at the FAA. And after 23 years of government regulations, I saw there was a gap in knowledge and no place to go and find out how to navigate all this DOT stuff. So I started Trucking Wins, which is an online training portal for drivers, safety directors, managers. So if you need to learn anything about DOT compliance operations, increasing revenue, reducing insurance costs, it's a one-stop shop at truckingwins.com. But today, I'm here just to help everybody and answer questions. And if you leave learning something, that's the goal of this little webinar. So fantastic.
Fantastic. And Lainey, can you share a little bit of your experience working with carriers at LoadSmart?
Yeah, absolutely. So I came to LoadSmart working out of a smaller brokerage based in Chicago. I, ended up there, came out of college with, my English degree and was like, wow, what am I going to do with this? Didn't really have a ton of options I was looking at. So I ended up working with this brokerage. My uncle was a truck driver so my whole life. So I'd been around it and I really enjoyed working with carriers. I knew, people in it. I was like, wow, these are, the people that I know, the people that I've grown up with. So I just found it a really easy transition to work, with those people. I'm all about human connection personally. So I like to know who I'm working with and what they're actually thinking. And then being able to use technology and introduce it to different carriers and say, hey, try this, times are busy, times are hard. This might be something that helps you. And then, hearing it when it does work, it's super gratifying. And I love to, help introduce those solutions to carriers of all sizes and types anytime.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of you being here. And we'll start with the top question on every small carrier's mind, cash flow. Damien, what kind of tools or techniques, philosophies do you take with improving cash flow?
So I think it all comes down to core strategy. Rolsey is a carrier that focuses on one thing, and that takes strategic goals. And for me, strategy means trade-offs. What are the trade-offs you're willing to make? Our strategy is stay on one lane, know that lane really, really well. And we chose this lane because of demand density. And so we did a lot of research to understand what the bottom of the market could be for this lane, which we're seeing right now. And we set up the entire strategy so that we could run profitably at the bottom of the market. So what that meant was during the boom times in 2020 and 2021, we had to have focus and take the rates that we knew were best for us and were accretive to our strategy and continue to build density and keep our trucks moving. This trade-off was that we weren't taking those $10,000 loads down to Florida. We weren't chasing rates and trying to, get our cash flow stacked, because we knew that this time would come, and we knew that we would need to sort of be embedded with customers during the downtime as well as the good time. So for me, it all comes down to strategy, making sure that you have all the right systems and processes in place so you don't have extra costs. I know there's gonna be a question about technology here probably later, but can you leverage technology to reduce your back office? Or can you leverage more drivers to take care of some of that back office work so that when this time does come, you don't have a lot of overhead or a lot of non-revenue producing headcount on the books. So that's sort of our take. Our take was plan for the worst and enjoy the good times while they last, but always know that you might be running at $1.50 a mile, and how can you get your costs below that?
And John, what are some of the techniques that and I know you have a lot of them, but like maybe top 3 techniques that you've been training your carriers on cash flow and getting the most revenue out of each of their loads?
All right. So whenever I talk to a trucking company, I always say, what are we in business? Well, we're in business to make money. And clearly we don't want to do it unsafe and hurt people, but we want to make as much money as possible. So it all starts with revenue. So how do you keep revenue coming into a trucking company? You got to keep the tires spinning around in circles. So you got to think about what are the hurdles to keep that from happening. Well, number 1 is hours of service. If you can learn the hours of service, take advantage of any exception they have, do it legally, but embrace those exceptions: personal conveyance, yard move, split sleeper, the short haul exemption, the 16-hour day, the agricultural exemption's huge. If you can learn those, teach your drivers, keep the tires spinning, that's important. And then to piggyback what Damon said is customers. You want a happy customer. When the rates were good, he said he didn't chase the dollar. He wanted to establish good customer bases. So when the market kind of goes down, they trust him. Well, the same thing goes when they book a load, they want the load delivered. They don't want you to get shut down at a scale and have to explain why it ain't there. They don't want you to crash a bunch of times and then they get drug into a lawsuit. They don't want to see CSA scores that are horrible. So if you can control your CSA and get the loads done and keep your customers happy, and at the same time, use those hours of service to your advantage, you will see your revenue increase, period, case closed.
And as far as like fintech type options, Damien, do you use any kind of fuel cards or factorings like that to help with cash flow?
So we're pretty fortunate that we don't need to factor. When I started the company, I built it with the idea that we would not factor, just because we don't want to give away 2% of our top line. And so we've always been pretty conservative and made sure that we had enough cash to keep operations going. So we've been fairly fortunate there. We do use some other fintech tools, though. Obviously, we have a normal fuel card that gives us sort of a cost plus benefit at the pump. But we also leverage Relays technology, which gives us a lot of control over our expenses without me having to stay up until 2 a.m. to pay a lumber fee or buy a tire. So we really try to delegate as much as we can to our drivers, and they sort of know what the guardrails are. So they have the power to make decisions. And if they make the wrong decision, we know about it as soon as we wake up, and we can talk to them and say, hey, let's go over this decision you made and how you're going to make a better decision next time. But we really try to empower the drivers, and the modern fintech tools really help us to.
Great. And you've mentioned a couple times now about how you empower your drivers to kind of make those decisions, things like that. Can you share a little bit more about like your philosophy about drivers and their trajectory on their career path and how that
this might
helps
go back.
with this?
Sure. This might go back to sort of my whole strategy. I mentioned that we stay on a dense lane. It also allows us to run a lot of relays. And so that keeps drivers closer to home. And I'm sort of looking 5 to 10 years in the future to understand what is the driver base going to look like 5 to 10 years in the future? And how can I set my drivers up for that now? That means giving them a career path. That means giving them a pay structure that might be a little bit different than what a lot of the industry does. All my drivers are paid by the hour for all on duty and driving hours. That does a lot of things. John would probably like this. It means they don't speed. The faster they drive, the less they make. So my drivers don't speed. It also means that they're willing to do more while they're stopped at the dock. If I were to pay by the mile, when they're stopped at the dock, they're off the clock. But my drivers, they say, hey, I want a career path. I'd love to be able to be a lead driver or a driver that has some invoicing responsibility. And so they actually look for opportunities to maximize their time while they're getting loaded and unloaded, while they're waiting for a tire change, and while they're doing all those things that truck drivers normally do for free. So that benefits me and keeps my back office headcount a little bit lower, while also making my drivers happier. I have about a 14% or 13% churn rate today, which is quite a bit lower than the industry standard. And it's because, my drivers skew a little bit younger. They're looking for that career path. They're looking for that job that maybe is a little bit different than most OT.
Definitely. I have seen churn rates as high as over 100%. So 13%. John, do you want to share a little bit about how you help, how things like split sleeper berth could help with driver retention?
All right, so we talked about, like I said before, we want to increase revenue. We haven't gotten into the costs of trucking. And what Damon said is he wants to get the money in as fast as he can. We want to increase revenue, but we don't want to unnecessarily have it go out the door without having that money do some more value to our company. So reducing insurance, maintenance, fuel costs, handling payroll issues, that can increase cash flow in itself. But split sleeper berth, I would say this: split sleeper's been around since 1935 in some way, shape, or form. A lot of people think this is a new thing. No, in September of 2020, they just changed the way that we apply it. Split sleeper was there before September of 2020. And the problem is with paper logs, no one ever needed to really embrace split sleeper and understand how it can help you keep those tires moving. But now that we have the limitations of the ELDs, understanding the split sleeper can keep those tires moving. Specifically, they have a new thing that came out in September of 2020 that a lot of people still don't understand. If you take split sleeper as part of your 10-hour break, and then you have some delay during the day, that delay off duty or sleeper can be extended if you validate it with a proper sleeper berth before or after. It's a little complicated, but if you can master split sleeper by extending your day or splitting your 10-hour break into 2 pieces, you can actually get a load delivered that others can't. Problem is most drivers just don't understand it today, to be honest.
And Lainey, my first question for you, how have you seen tech stack be important for driver retention when we've talked to carriers?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it can take a lot of the calls and the things that drivers are dealing with off of them, or reduce it. We work with ELDs. John mentioned the limitations that ELDs bring. They also can bring a lot of advantages. If you integrate with them and you're able to update your customers, we have a link that you can send. Your customers can look every 5 minutes. They'll get an updated location of where that truck is. So they're not calling your driver every 5, 10, 15 minutes saying, hey, where are you now? Where are you now? I know TQL is my favorite for that. They call about every 20 minutes for all their carriers. So that's one of the things I really like. It removes that annoyance, reduces it. We also integrate with some ELDs so drivers can update and upload their BOLs, as they're leaving the dock, as they're heading out, so that they're not having to remember to turn in this paperwork. They're not having delays in getting paid because it got left in a truck that someone else took and we don't have that paperwork yet. So in my opinion, that's one of the things that you can use tech for, is hey, reducing what drivers have to deal with or letting them handle things on their own so that they can have more efficient processes and not be waiting on other people to really pay them for the job they've already done.
I'm sure getting paid on time is a big part of that. So having the paperwork when you need it in order to get paid.
Yes.
Damien, you were kind of starting to share a little bit about tech stack. Do you want to share a little bit more about that in relation to driver
absolutely.
retention?
Yeah, I love talking about the tech stack. I think it's super important. And we use technology wherever we can. We've seen over the last 5 years or so, maybe even 8 years, a lot of venture capital pouring into the trucking industry. And the result of that has been a lot of tools that are far better for sort of making a business more efficient. So every tool that we use, we look for integration. We actually use integration as our benchmark over usability. So even if a tool might not have a very good UI, if it has a great API, then it probably is going to win out over a tool that doesn't have any API but has a really nice UI. So we are actually building sort of our own operating system for the business so that we can bring all the data in from all these disparate sources. So fuel from our fuel card, from our payments platform, fuel from the truck, data from the truck. So telematics data, information from the driver. So all their hours of service information can all come into one database, and then we can use that to sort of run the business. We can use that for routing and for dispatching, even into John's bit world, into safety. We have a partner that actually has a database of all the DOT rules, and they keep them updated, and they link into our system so that whenever they see an issue, they can flag it for us and say, hey, here's the issue. Here's the regulation that it violates. Here's what you're going to need to do about it. And so all of that now means that I don't have to have an extra headcount in the office. It's also nice for drivers because it's all just algorithmically generated. So instead of it being, hey, your safety manager is picking on me, nobody else is getting picked on, we can sort of defer the technology and say, hey, this is just facts. You went over, you didn't take your 30-minute break in time. It's just facts. Nobody's picking on you. The other nice thing for drivers is that because we have all this information into our own database, we can automate the whole check call system. We're probably not going to change the minds of customers and change the minds of brokers, but we don't really need to. They can call in via our phones, and the phone system can actually respond we use first speech to text software. So a broker can call in and say, hey, I'm looking for load 12345. What's the location? And the system can sort of derive from that. I think I know what load you're asking about. And because you're calling at this time, and I know that I have a load in progress with that load number, my assumption is that you're looking for a location and an ETA to the next stop. We can automatically send that out because we're already calculating it. So that saves us time in the back office. And it also means we can route all those calls that would have gone to drivers right into an automated system. So the drivers never get called. The brokers are satisfied and the customers are satisfied because they get the information they want without ever even having to talk to the driver. And they sometimes don't even know that they're not talking to a driver. So if we can use technology to sort of smooth out these processes and still achieve the goals that our customers want, then it's sort of a win-win in our book.
Great. Yeah, the fewer calls and interruptions, the better, right? Our drivers. John, is there anything that you would want to share there as well? Maybe on how the tech stack could really help with driver?
Well, I think when you get to just technology and trucking, I think cameras are a big thing that people overlook. And it has to do with these nuclear verdicts and lawsuits and handling claims. There's a lot of good cameras out there that you can use technology to monitor speed, hard braking, see the interactive nature of the driver versus the environment around them. And at the same token, ELDs do the same type things. These hard braking monitors that you can use for technology can reduce your overall cost of risk. And when you're generating less cost of risk, meaning driving down insurance rates, using this for claims handling and safety, you end up able to recruit better drivers because you're more attractive to the customer base. So I think technology, whether it's cameras, ELDs, any kind of monitoring of hard braking, it's all effective for the trucking industry to improve that.
Damien, when you're talking to shippers, do you share some of the technology and how you're different from other carriers?
It sort of depends on the customer. And I use customers to talk about brokers and shippers. You know, over the last 7 years or so, we've seen broker share go from about 6% of the loads in the marketplace up to almost 40% of the loads. And so we're actually sort of, I think that in the industry, direct shipper contracts have usually been king. But we actually find that they while they're nice, they actually can create a little bit more friction. They sometimes create some more operational burden. And so if we can leverage a broker to get the same loads, the broker is going to take on some of that operational burden for us. They become our sales team. They become the interface with the customer. Sometimes it's actually a little bit smoother, especially a broker that's a little bit more tech forward. So it depends on which customer we're talking. Some shippers, if it's a smaller paper manufacturer that really just needs to get their finished product up to Winco, they're not really going to care that much about, you know, how fancy the database is and what algorithms we're using to make sure our drivers are on time. They just want us to deliver their load. A broker, on the other hand, might say, you know what, we have a goal to reduce the cost of the carrier. You're the carrier. What things are you doing to reduce your cost? And that's where the conversation really becomes important, because, you know, I could be upset and I could say, oh man, you're just trying to squeeze the carrier. Or I could say, you know what, there probably is a better way, and maybe I could reduce my costs by leveraging technology. Would I be able to get additional volume from you if I was able to do that at a much lower rate? And so the conversations usually with the brokers that are a little bit more tech forward are usually a little bit better for us, and we're able to align our incentives better. And at this point, like with a lot of our broker customers, we don't even have to talk about rates. They know who we are. We've been very candid with them about what our operating costs are, and they just tender us the loads. So in that situation, it's actually better for us and reduces our costs overall to just have that conversation with one broker, and then they can handle selling the shipper or not. It's okay with us if they don't ever tell a shipper who the carrier even is. We can do our thing and operate at a lower cost. The broker gets to make money because they're making money on the spread. And usually everybody's happy until the volume dries up.
Of course. So, and your strategy there hasn't really changed since the market has.
The strategy doesn't change. So the strategy is long term. The tactics do change a little bit. I talked a little bit about the sort of the economy of dispersion. When COVID hit, everybody went remote, and so I saw that as an opportunity to say, hey, the whole world's going remote. A truck is remote. Let's put some of that office work into the truck. What you're doing there, though, is you're taking revenue producing headcount and you're having them do non-revenue producing tasks. So there is a point where you have to say, okay, maybe for today, it doesn't make sense for you to use extra time. We need to keep our costs low. So it doesn't make sense for you to use extra time to do our invoicing. So maybe we bring that into a cheaper non-revenue producing headcount for now. And we'll get back to it once the market loosens up a little bit or tightens up, depending on which side of the marketplace you're on. So it does matter, and we do want to keep a close eye on that, because a lot of the things we're doing are quite aspirational. And when you're doing things that are aspirational, it does cost money. And so you might want to dial those things back until there's a little bit more margin out there in the market. And then you can get back on that track for those long-term goals. We probably won't see our business flywheel completely spinning for at least another 5 years. There's a lot of technology that hasn't come out yet that we're sort of setting up for, and it might not make sense to overpay for some services and for some tasks today that we won't really see the benefits for another 5 years. So yes, we do change our tactics a little bit depending on the market, but the strategy doesn't change.
I'm just going to take a quick look here to see if we have any questions. There's a question here that I'm going to ask John. What is CSA?
All right, so ultimately CSA was invented for one reason and one reason only. The government formed a system called CSA that replaced an old ancient system called SafeStat. And what's the reason that it was invented? To prioritize what carriers the feds are going to go knock on their door and do a review, period, case closed. The government made the database. They're the ones that present the scores. And it's so investigators go after the company with the highest CSA scores and do an intervention. Well, now that CSA is there and the government looks at these scores to decide who to go visit, now you have all these other entities that are looking at your CSA scores. Who? Well, as Damon said, brokers look at your CSA score. Some shipper contracts won't give it to you if you have bad CSA. Who else? These defense attorneys and the plaintiff side, they're using our CSA either to defend us or to go after us with verdicts. Who else uses? Insurance companies absolutely use it. The higher the CSA score, the more they're going to charge you. So when you look at it, even though it was invented for the federal government, there are other entities that trucking companies are actually more worried about than the government coming and knocking on their door. And having a conditional rating from the feds, once you have that, brokers will consider that a death sentence. You're not going to get any loads with a conditional rating from the majority of brokers. So what do companies need to do? They need to proactively control their CSA score. What I see a lot of trucking companies doing is they aggressively attack a claim. Like if they get a cargo claim or an auto liability claim, they take pictures, they get evidence, they submit it, they try to fight tooth and nail to keep that claim low. But when they get violations, they don't fight as much to get those violations removed through data queues. At the same token, a goal for a trucking company is to reduce a claim from even happening. We don't want cargo losses. We don't want physical damage or auto liability losses. Well, when it comes to roadsides, you don't want violations because violations will turn into high CSA scores. Claims and losses will turn into higher insurance rates. So we need to take an aggressive approach towards this safety and compliance to drive down those scores, because it's not just the government using them, it's many other entities using them as well.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, John. And Lainey, I'm going to ask an audience question to you because I know that you just recently did some onboarding for a carrier that had older drivers or people that are used to doing things on paper and have been for many years. So their question is, how do you introduce new technology and that chain workers that are used to handling it through paper?
Absolutely. So yeah, I think I recently went down and I was working with someone who'd done it the same way that she had always done it since like 1980 when they opened their company. So it was like, we print out the paper, we all write it on it in a little whiteboard. And then they were entering it into a spreadsheet instead of like a manual thing there, but that was as forward as it had gone. And I think the most important thing is meeting people where they're at. So going in and saying, well, here's 1,000 new innovations and tech things that we've done, we're going to do all of them tomorrow, is going to get people scared and put people on defensive saying, well, I don't need that. That's going to be really hard. Say, hey, like, let's look at our process right now. Okay, well, what if instead of, turning in the paper on someone's desk, what if you, took a photo of it and put in the load number? Okay, well, I can do that, or, I can do that step and get comfortable with that one first step. And then move on to the next one. So I think having a goal and a plan of what you want to prioritize first is really important before bringing it to people who maybe aren't as comfortable with technology, of what is the most important thing and fundamental thing that you want to innovate first, and then building from there slowly over time. Because once they start doing the new thing, that'll become part of their process. It's not scary anymore. So now we can introduce the next scary thing, evolve over time.
Exactly. That's great. Yeah, little bit at a time instead of trying to do everything all at once.
Big changes are scary. So little ones a little bit less scary. So
perfect. And Damien, I think you said you work mostly with younger drivers, but I'm gonna open it up to you if you have anything you wanted to add there.
Yeah. Even younger drivers sometimes don't like change, and it's not just technology. But this is something that I've dealt with my whole career. I've managed teams of recent college grads and employees that maybe just got out of grad school, and so change management is just an important thing to get your head around from the outset. One thing that I do is we're constantly changing things. Maybe we have a new process for how we dispatch the load, or maybe we have a new process for how we're going to do a fuel program. And we are constantly changing and constantly testing. And some of the changes are very much in the driver's benefit. An example of that is when we put cameras in the trucks, we get a little bit of an insurance break. Well, I can pass that break on to drivers in terms of their compensation. So they're like, oh, we love cameras. Cameras are awesome. Or we use the cameras to create videos of all of the facilities. So we can sort of create a little video with a map so they can see, oh, okay, I go through the guard check and I just stop there. And then I'm going to go around the back of this particular building. Well, that's another benefit of a camera in the truck. I haven't actually heard any drivers say, oh man, I hate having cameras in the truck. And we have driver facing cameras as well. They've only seen benefits to that. And if we continue to change things and show them why it could benefit them, some of them don't. There's definitely things that are going to create more burden for the driver. But as long as we're really transparent, that's actually one of our values, act with transparency. as long as we're transparent about why we're doing it and they can see a benefit, it usually has to do with reducing costs or increasing revenue. Or maybe it's by product. So maybe it's we're going to wrap the trucks with new graphics. Okay, I don't like the way the graphics. Well, that's okay. It's not for you. It's for the motoring public. It's for our customers, and we think that it's long term is going to drive additional revenue and brand recognition. Oh, okay. Well, more revenue is good because that keeps me in a job, and I like the way you pay me. So I think it's a lot of just being transparent about some of those decisions, and we never get it right. I've never worked at any business where the employees said, man, the communication here is perfect and I wouldn't change a thing. It's never happened. Everybody wants more communication. So we try to just over communicate and, like I said, change things often, because it means that when you do change things, it's not a surprise and drivers are used to it. And then the last thing is maybe unique to us is all of our drivers are W. So, we don't have the situation where we have a lot of owner operators that can refuse to do things or say, no, I'm not taking my truck there. They're my trucks and W-2 employees. And so that probably makes things a little bit easier. So I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying, oh yeah, it's super easy if you just change things all the time. It's probably easier for me because the way we classify employees.
And John, your whole thing is about consulting and helping carriers to make changes to costs. What are some of your suggestions on?
Well, I'll tell you, I've never done this on a webinar and I'm going to do it in a minute, but if you look at ELDs, we're fortunate for change management with technology that ELDs came out, because most of these drivers, unless you're running a 99 engine or local or drive away, tow away, you need an ELD in your truck. And I don't care what your age is, which the demographic of drivers is very old in this country right now, as we know. Everyone was forced to learn ELDs. And if you look from a technology standpoint, dealing with day to day, any driver that can learn and master and use their ELD, then when you put in dispatching system, then when you put in cameras, then when you put in any other technology to improve efficiencies at a company, it's easier for a driver to make that change, because you can simply say, you did it with ELDs. We know you can do it with these other areas. Now I'm going to do this just for giggles. When I have a driver meeting in person, I tell everybody to cross their fingers. So everybody on this webinar do this. And then I want you to cross your thumbs. Come on, play along, everybody, right? When you do that, that's natural. That's a paper log for the old school guys. And honestly, that's an ELD for the young guys when forced to fill out a paper log. If you've been accustomed to doing paper invoicing and now we're going to do it electronically, you're not used to it. Now, everybody flip your thumb. Now you're uncomfortable. I just demonstrated what change feels like. You just experienced it. Put your thumbs back. That's a paper log for the old school guy. That's an ELD for the young guy. Put it back again. Now we're advancing our technology at a company and it's uncomfortable. Demonstrate to drivers, keep flipping your thumbs, and eventually you'll get used to it. So there's a little visual on consulting change management where they can feel what change feels like by something simply like flipping your thumbs, but apply that to everything else you need to change at your company. It just takes repetition, practice. I've never done that on a webinar, but I do it all the time at my driver meeting when they complain about stuff. So it's pretty cool. So
That was great.
I hope that was a good visual, a participation reference on our webinar.
Definitely. Always want to have that.
Yeah.
John, you've talked a little bit about ELDs, and I know, is there more that you want to talk about there? I know there's some industry news that you wanted to as well.
Well, it kind of leads into this conversation about technology. A lot of drivers that will not embrace ELDs have gone out and gotten glider kits with 99 engine, or they run older trucks, whether they're in good shape or they're like show trucks. If you have a 99 engine as of right now, you don't need an ELD. And there are a lot of drivers that simply keep those old trucks for that reason. Well, in September, the federal government has published a proposed rule, and 5 things they're looking at enhancing the ELD mandate and the rule. Well, the most controversial one is it is possible they're going to get rid of the exemption for 99 engine. That means every driver now running paper with a 99 engine, it is possible if they change the law, we're going to need ELDs in all of those trucks. There's an open comment period right now that runs through November 15th. I think we're going to provide that link here. and on Women in Trucking website. So everybody can go click the link, open it up, and comment to the Federal Register as to whether they think this one item is a good idea or a bad idea for industry, right? So this is one of those proactive times where instead of just complaining about it, you have a voice. It should be heard, and you only have 3 weeks to go on there and make a comment to the government.
Great, thank you. And I did post that, so thank you. Damien, you've talked a little bit about the relationships with brokers, and how do you maintain those relationships? How did you start those relationships and also maintain them?
For us, it was kind of two parts. One was first identifying who we wanted to work with. Lainey said something about TQL. We've never taken a TQL load. We've never taken a Landstar load. And it was just a little bit of research and maybe some of my time back in the broker world that sort of helped me hone in on who we would want to work with, who's going to reduce some of the friction. So we started there. What are the goals of the folks that we do work with? Are there goals to increase efficiency? A lot of brokers today have the idea that, well, if I can create more of a liquid marketplace or have more demand in the marketplace and can reduce the miles that are empty for a carrier, then they should be able to take each load for a lower rate. It's an idea. I don't know if I agree with the idea, but that's their goal. And once you can understand that and say, okay, I understand what your goal is, and now let's work together on both of us achieving that goal, things become a lot easier. In terms of communication, I don't know if anybody here has heard of a Slack. It's just a platform it's kind of like AIM or MSN. It's a chat process, or it's a chat platform. We actually have a lot of brokers that are in our Slack instance. They're connected to it. So if we have a problem, we talk to them just like they are an employee at Rollsy or somebody in the back office at my carrier. So we have a direct line. And that was a lot of, once they understood who we were and what our goals were, they said, oh, you guys are a little bit different than a lot of the carriers we work with. And we actually score brokers as well. We have what's called a hassle score. And so we kind of let them in on some of that. And they say, well, can you tell us what our hassle score is? And I'm like, yeah, I don't mind telling you that at all. It's an index. And once you start saying, hey, we're trying to provide data to just help everybody and make the whole industry better, then it's more of a partnership instead of some sort of adversarial relationship. So I think it comes down to choose who you want to work with, figure out what your value is to them, and then try to communicate that value. It was always a little bit difficult at first because you get, a carrier representative that's like an L3 or L4 that doesn't have their goal is just to find a cheap truck. And if you can sort of get above them and say, hey, I have some goals here as well, but I think that I can help you. I think we can align our incentives. Then the conversation starts to change and things start become a little bit easier in terms of sort of getting embedded with, and they become more honest with it. We've had conversations where we've seen the market slipping and we'll say, hey, we're taking this at $4,200, but the market is falling. I'm going to offer you a lower rate. Even though I'm a dedicated carrier on this run, I'm going to lower my rate proactively because I know the market is falling and I don't want somebody to snipe these from me. So, we're going to be clear about our goals. I'm not doing it to help you. I'm not doing it because I like you. I'm doing it because I want to keep taking these loads and I can take them at a lower rate. And I'm going to be proactive about getting that lower rate. And for that, they're far more transparent with us. They'll say, hey, the customer's pushing back on this rate now, the market is softened up. Or, hey, another carrier is trying to underbid you. Sorry, we know that sucks. Can we meet somewhere in the middle? So I think that being transparent and aligning goals is sort of the key takeaways of my long-winded answer there.
No, that was really great. And I'm sure, especially newer fleet would be really how you kind of build that relationship with brokers. You mentioned that you've had experience in the industry before you had your fleet, but how did you go about researching brokers, especially brokers you hadn't worked with?
So in some cases, it was trial and error. It's, we looked at who are the top brokers, that meaning by volume or by revenue, and starting to work with them and understanding their processes. There's a lot of brokers that think that they're very tech forward because they've taken a bunch of processes and put them into a browser. But they're all the same old processes. So even though maybe you are connecting to them via Project 44, they have all your tracking, they have this beautiful user experience in a browser. When you start taking loads from them, you realize, oh, you're not actually doing anything, any new processes. You're still doing the same old processes. You just are doing it through a browser. And so some of it we had to learn just from taking those loads. Some of it, of course, was just from knowledge of the industry and understanding who the new players were in the market. And then for the negative side, or the brokers that you don't want to work with, it was a lot of forums and Facebook groups where you see the same names popping up over and over again, and you realize, okay, my probability of a problem from this particular customer is much higher than it might be with another one. So regardless of what the rate is, it's not worth a trailer being out of service for a week because they can't get the load off, or you can't get a hold of somebody in customer service when something goes wrong. It's not worth that risk. We like John said earlier, if you're not moving your assets, then your utilization is just plummeting, and you can't overcome bad utilization.
Check back to our Q&A. I saw some other questions come up.
Oh, I'll add one thing, Rachel, if I can.
Yes.
About working with customers, the hassle score. So, and this is something you don't have to have anything high to do this. We use an index. So all of our communication systems are going into one database. So for us, it's pretty easy. But how many emails do we get per load? How many phone calls are we getting per load? And like I said, we route all of our calls that are supposed to go to drivers. We route them through one central system. So I know if brokers are trying to get a hold of a driver. How many calls does it take to get a hold of somebody that can help when there's a problem? What is the booking process like? How difficult is it? How difficult is it to get paid? So there's all of these different things that you have to do to interact with the customer, and they all have some level of friction or not friction. And if you compile all those and weight them and say, okay, I don't really mind getting a bunch of text messages, but phone calls kind of sucks because that's synchronous. I have to stop what I'm doing to answer the phone. So I'm going to weight that heavier than a text message. Or, hey, I actually need to get paid within 30 days. So I'm going to weight a late pay higher than I'm going to weight an email. And so once you've figured out what that score is for you, you can sort of say for yourself, hey, I think that either I need to get a little extra money per load, or I just need to cut this relationship off because it's actually costing me more money. Maybe not on the load itself, but in waiting for an unload, waiting to get paid, answering the phone 30 times throughout transit. There's all these things that are costs. And if you can maximize your own time, then you are reducing your cost or making yourself available to do other revenue producing things. So that's one other thing I'll say about how we sort of filter out.
Thank you. And there is a question here for you, Damien. Why did you choose to pay your drivers by the hour versus some of the more traditional ways of like by the mile or by the load, et cetera?
It has to do with looking forward. So I mentioned that my drivers skew younger. Well, I'm in Seattle, and in Seattle, people can work at an Amazon warehouse, or they can even work at Dick's Burgers for $20 an hour, and they can make a fairly decent living. They can get free education. They have 100% paid healthcare. And most younger people that are going to be the drivers of the next decade are looking for something that's more similar to that model. They don't, when you start talking about pay by the mile or pay by the week, and you get an extra $50 for a tarp and this for a drop and a hook, it starts getting really convoluted. And I know that to some extent that is by design. But to attract drivers that are going to be drivers for a long time, we had to sort of rethink it. We don't necessarily pay more than other drivers or than other carriers. We looked at a lot of carriers to see what they're at the end of the year, what was their percentage of cash compensation to a driver as a percentage of their total revenue. We're actually still right in there. It's just a lot more predictable for the drivers. The drivers feel far more comfortable with, hey, I was on the clock for 12 hours today, and so I make, $22 an hour plus time and a half for overtime. I can calculate that very easily, and so there's not any surprises at the end of the pay period. The other thing is, I wanted my drivers I wanted them to do more work in the truck. They all have Wi-Fi in the truck. They all have computers in the truck, and so they can actually do a lot more work for us than just drive. So that was another reason. And then lastly, I wanted to move the risk onto the carrier. It's really hard to force a team of maybe driver managers or dispatchers, whatever you want to call them, to get more efficient unless you can see it in the bottom line. And so if a dispatcher does a bad job and finds a pickup that is 500 miles away from the last drop, well, that driver's getting paid for that empty mileage, and it's going to hurt the score of the dispatcher. We're going to say, hey, you didn't do a very good job of planning this. And so it's also to align incentives between the back office and the drivers. Now the risk is on that dispatcher to find the right loads and maximize the revenue and maximize the driver's time. And it's also on me or my maintenance people to make sure that the trucks are in good shape, which goes to sort of what John was saying about CSA scores, because if they have a breakdown, we're still paying the driver for that time. And so it is a risk, and it is very hard for a lot of carriers to get their heads wrapped around that. But we basically moved the risk onto the carrier and off of the driver. I don't think that it's fair to say, hey, when I make money, you'll make money. There's not very many jobs that are like that in the country right now. And it also is not fair to say, hey, sorry, I gave you a crappy truck and you're going to be sitting for a week in, Southern California because I didn't do a very good job of maintenance. And by the way, you're not getting paid for that time. So it sort of aligns everyone's incentives and moves risk onto the carrier where I believe it should be. Maybe that's altruistic of me. But so far it's been working. Our retention is pretty.
Yes.
To add one thing to that, Rachel, being an investigator with FMCSA, I went into hundreds of companies. Now I actually work in the insurance and the DOT consulting realm. So I've been into hundreds and hundreds of customers, not just from the broker side giving them loads. And I think the key word that Damon missed here, but he said it, he just didn't say the word, is it breeds efficiency when you pay by the hour from a company perspective. Think of it this way. If you're going to pay the driver X amount per hour, you as an owner want to breed as many efficiencies as possible, because the more money you can bring in within that hour, your driver pay is a set cost and you're still paying him very well. If you can breed those efficiencies, you're going to be more profitable as a trucking company, and then you can reinvest in your drivers, equipment, better technology, etc. I have a company that I work with now, Monday through Friday, just like him, pay by the hour, time and a half after 40. They run the pay off the logbooks. So these drivers will absolutely keep their logs legal because they get stopped within that 14-hour day or 70-hour work week. But they're paid Monday through Friday off on the weekends. This company giving drivers off on the weekend, they cannot afford to be inefficient Monday through Friday. When you pay by the mile, you pay by revenue, drivers get a little pokey here and there. And like he said, you get shut down at a scale, you may lose the revenue, you don't pay the driver, but you're not utilizing your equipment like you should. So I think Damon is on to here that could be something that you see a lot more companies.
Very insightful, guys. Thank you so much. And one last question. Yes, go ahead.
I just want to add one more thing there for any carriers that are worried about the cost. Consider the cost of the normal churn rate, which is a little over 100% depending on the day. Maybe let's say it's 90%, just for a conservative number. Consider the cost you have of recruiting, of driver bonuses, of all the training, all the costs that come with constantly having to replace your workforce. And now imagine that you had, I think that a 13 to 15% churn rate is healthy. If I had a 0% churn rate, I would say I am definitely overpaying. So I think a 15% churn rate is a good number to sort of aim for. And if you consider that you're able to pay your drivers a little bit more because you're not having to replace them all the time, I think that that's better for everybody. I think everybody's a little bit happier. And if you have drivers that are not complaining or are not upset all the time, it'll make your life easier, I believe. Sorry to interrupt you, Rachel.
Oh, no, thank you so much. I think those kind of insights are very, very helpful for our carrier. I can see Courtney is back on with us. Have we run out of time?
No, I noticed that there was a hand raised for a question. So Mindy, I'm going to allow you to talk if you'd like to ask your question. We'll fit that in before we run out of time.
I'm enjoying this conversation, so thank you for having it, and thank you for Women in Trucking for hosting these each month. So I wanted to ask Lainey a question. What is the one biggest threat that small carriers face that's going to affect their tomorrow?
So I think there are a few, but I think one of the biggest ones I see is like a lack of insight into their own data. I think a lot of times people are so focused on getting through, today, getting through the immediate situation that they don't have a plan for lasting in the long term or lasting through tomorrow. Tech can be really useful in that. Damon's been talking a lot about how he's implemented that. There's a lot of different ways you can go. I don't think there's one specific answer, but I think having that insight and being able to sit down and look at actual numbers and data and having the time to do that is something that's really important in being able to last through tough situations. There's a lot of different ways that you can go, but having that information helps regardless of what decision you make. Making it on facts and knowledge is key.
And one last question for John. John, do you think small carriers are going to be able to stay competitive with many of the larger companies going to pay per hour? Do you think they can stay competitive?
I mean, I honestly do. I think that a big staying competitive, though, is reducing your cost. And a small carrier, to me, one of the biggest disadvantages they have is the cost of insurance. If you're a larger carrier and you can self-insure, or you're a larger carrier, there's more revenue there for the insurance industry to collect. And if you have a loss, the loss ratio isn't as high. So I think if smaller carriers could try to get the best quality driver and reduce their CSA scores, which thus you would hope would reduce their overall losses, finding your way to insurance market, reduce the cost of insurance as it keeps rising is going to be a big key to that. You know, fuel is fuel. Driver pay is driver pay. Equipment and parts cost what they cost. There are some reductions for larger fleets with that, but I think insurance truly sink a small carrier ship. So controlling the insurance costs, I think small carriers survive.
One last question for Damian. With many companies going to pay per hour, how are they going to hold drivers accountable and get the most productivity from that driver by still paying them by the hour?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the technology helps a lot here. We can run a quick report if we want to see across the whole fleet the miles from any driver. So are you falling far behind in the miles? With ELDs, we can see, the frequency of stops. With, cameras in the trucks, we can get an idea of what's happening in the truck. So I think that using technology and understanding what is the goal of the driver? Usually it's to deliver a load. Are you delivering it on time? Are you late to the delivery every time? Why are you late? It's pretty easy to see using technology. And if they're getting the goals done and they're doing their job, and maybe some extra projects on top of that, then great, pass. If not, dig into why. And if you can see that it's because they're taking advantage, or maybe they're at the shipper and they got loaded and they're going to wait there for an extra couple of hours. It's pretty easy to spot that in the data, especially if you have a few drivers doing kind of the same thing. Again, with our strategy, something that John was kind of saying before is the drivers are on a 5-day work week. They want to get home. It's on the dispatcher or the planner to figure out what the week looks like and get that driver home on day 5. And so we don't, all the incentives are pretty well aligned. And so we can usually spot if anybody's trying to milk the clock or something, we can usually spot that.
Then to add to that, hours of service and knowing the exemptions for hours of service, embracing them and promoting that in recruiting new drivers. I am convinced that if companies would just learn how to use every aspect of split sleeper if they're over the road, and use personal conveyance properly, if you're hauling produce, embrace the agricultural exemption. Train your drivers on these things, because then you're going to recruit the driver that understands the flexibility you're trying to add to his life to get him home on the weekend. Then you go to the hour pay thing. If you can run more efficiently during the time you're working, and get as much work done as possible within that time frame, it's just going to benefit everybody. And that's, to me, where these hours of service rules are just so unknown and need to learn them.
You raise a good question for me, John. With you promoting the split sleeper, do you think that raises more safety concerns for a company?
I honestly don't. And I teach an example. With this. If you start at 6 a.m., the 14-hour clock is 8 p.m. But if you do a proper split by using sleeper berth at truck stops, and you had a load that started at 6 a.m. and had an appointment at 11 p.m., knowing you're running up against the 14-hour clock, you would have to leave at 6 and be to that appointment at 8 when they don't want to see you till 11. Instead of that, if you use split sleeper right, a driver could take a break in the middle of the day at a truck stop of their choosing. Not be forced to run up against the 14, take a break when their body tells them they need one without losing the hours, and then make the 11 o'clock appointment even if they started their day at 6. That's now legal with split sleeper. But a lot of drivers don't think you can do that. They're like, if I start at 6, at 8 p.m., I'm done. Not true anymore. Utilize that delay in the middle of the day to get the rest you need, to take the break you want, and still get the job done efficiently. I overall think that that's a safety item to allow the drivers that flexibility in split sleep.
Thank you.
If you guys have a couple extra minutes, we do have another hand raised for another quick question.
And in no hurry here.
Absolutely.
So I'm good.
Awesome. Gwendolyn, we can hear you, but it's really faint.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
We can't hear you, Gwendolyn.
Okay.
Is it the one you have posted in the Q&A, Gwendolyn?
Yeah.
Do you want to?
What has been recommended for the drivers and or carriers to do to get help with keeping the CSA scores down?
I can jump on that if you want. You ready? All right. So to know how to keep the CSA scores down, we'll call it the game of CSA. You have to know the rules of the game of CSA, right? So how long do these violations stay in your CSA score? 2 years. Does every driver need to understand that if they get a seatbelt warning today, the company will suffer from that for 2 years? Yes. Whether you get a warning or a citation, they both have the same effect. Companies need to understand how to do data queues. A data queue is challenging the CSA data to say it doesn't belong in your system. Where a lot of carriers fall short is crash data queues. They have a new program where if the crash isn't your fault, you can go into a data queue system, type in it wasn't your fault, and they remove the crash from your score. The difference from being in an alert and crash and not in alert and crash can keep the government away, get you better loads, reduce your insurance costs, keep the defense and plaintiff sides at bay in case you get in a crash. But you got to teach the drivers the rule of the game. I joke around that Monopoly, how much money do you collect when you pass go? Everybody's answering this now. $200. What color are the hotels? They're red. What are the most expensive properties? Park Place and Boardwalk. Are we all tracking what I'm saying? We know the rules of the game called Monopoly, but we don't play it no more. And it's for fake money. But people don't know the rules of the game called CSA, and it's for real money. You haven't played Monopoly in 20 years and you're playing this game right now. You need to teach our players, our drivers, our dispatchers, every stakeholder at our company, the rules of the game called CSA, so we can reach those scores and win the game.
John,
And
sorry.
I was just going to say, and you can learn more about John's. I think Michael posted here about 7 CSA basics. It's on his website, which I've added here on the chat.
I don't want this to be a commercial, but I have a website called truckings.com, and the whole goal of this is to educate as many people as possible. You can go to college and get a degree in OSHA, but there is no degree in FMCSA DOT. So I'm trying to help the industry learn and navigate all this so they can go out and do what Damon does best. Hire drivers, get loads, run the equipment, and let me try to help the drivers because Damon, you only have so much time in the day, correct? Thanks for the promo. Just kidding.
Well, thank you. And I know we're out of time. I wanted to say thank you so much to Courtney and Women in Trucking for having us today. I did provide a link, a bit.ly link there for our break-even calculator. It's a free tool that anyone can use. So please feel free to download that. It helps give you a little bit of more insight on how many miles you need to drive in order just to break even.
And thank you guys all. Thank you all the panelists and Rachel for being here today. And thank you to our attendees as well. That was
All right,
great.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.